On this episode of the After the Timeout podcast, in partnership with the Illinois Basketball Coaches Association, we welcome Phil Ralston, head boys basketball coach at Glenbrook South High School. We talked to Coach Ralston about breaking down a season into segments, coaching at 3 different high school programs with 100 wins each, and evaluating your team in the spring and fall. As always, thank you for listening to the After the Timeout podcast.
All right, Coach. So thank you for joining us today on the show. We like to start all of our guests off with the opening tip. For you, we wanted to talk about your 3 different head coaching stops in your career, and obviously very different schools. So for you, how did you know when a new job kind of intrigued you? How did you know you wanted to take that next step? And what do you look for to know it's one that you'd like to have?
That's a great question. I would say, I think if someone looked at my coaching resume, I have bounced around a lot, but I wouldn't necessarily say that was my intent. I think when I established my roots at Grant, I had this vision that it was a growing community, that it would eventually, that it was similar when I got there to like Warren in the late 70s. And I was thinking, boy, growing school, fantastic, great chance to establish myself and help grow this program. And as time kind of went on, it wasn't that I was looking to leave per se, as much as it was opportunities kind of presented themselves to me. And a lot of it had to do with the networking that I had been doing as a younger head coach, and previous to being a head coach, where I had run into a lot of people and things kind of presented themselves. And so I would investigate it. Actually, going to Geneva was not the first offer from Grant. I had an offer all the way up in Minnesota that part of me has always asked myself, what would have happened had I taken that opportunity to go back to Minnesota. So that's really more of what had happened. And when I was at Geneva, obviously we had a good thing going at Geneva. The program was in great shape. Lower levels were fantastic. Our feeder program was very well established and kind of running the system that we wanted for our future success. And it was kind of known that any kind of potential opportunity that would happen would have to be a really, really good one. And I had 2 of them. One that I took a hard pass on. Once again, had an offer from a coach that made it. Actually, it was a very strange meeting. Ran into a former superintendent at a football game up in Minnesota, and they had a head coaching job opening. And after sitting and talking with this guy for an afternoon, he gave my name to them, and they called me up and said, "Hey, would you interview for this job?" And I learned a long time ago, don't pass up a basketball opportunity. And that might be why I've moved around a little bit. And I've said no sometimes. And when I felt like it was the right opportunity that was best for me professionally and best for my family, I took it.
So I'm going to follow up on that a little bit, because I think you said a big key there, best for you and best for your family. How do you go about kind of diagnosing that, right? Because sometimes that could be hard, right? You go in there and they're telling you this, and this, and obviously you said you had some networking and people but ultimately, how do you kind of know you go in there so there's not any surprises, or maybe they need a coach and they want to kind of put a nice picture on it, but there's other things behind the scenes, knowing that opportunity is a good opportunity and it'll be a positive one?
Well, you don't know. And that's the problem, is that usually when you're going into a new job, you're going into a situation where it is unknown. If it is known, it's usually you're following a legend or a very, very public release of a coach for probably negative reasons. And so if it's not one of those two things that jump out at you, you don't know what the situation is. And a lot of things are usually kept pretty quiet as far as why. I mean, coaches can get burnt out and say, I'm done. There could be a quiet, asking of it's time for you to step down. But you really don't know. But each situation that I've kind of gone into has been similar in a sense. And it's not that I sought it out. It's just, this is what the situation was. When I took over at Grant, I think I was kind of groomed for the position. I was Tom Maple's assistant at Grant, and he was a 25-year veteran head coach, Hall of Fame coach, very small school, playing primarily small schools, but occasionally playing big ones. And so he was a good mentor for me early on to kind of say, hey, this is how you win when you're at the small school. Great education for me as a coach. Geneva, I felt, was a very similar situation to what I was leaving at Grant. Not necessarily known for basketball at the time, kind of like the underling to Batavia basketball, which was well known, and St. Charles East basketball, which is also pretty well known. And so Geneva was kind of like the small little brother in that neighborhood. And so it was not well known and well established. And I felt like if I could do what I was doing at Grant, being the school that started out of 900 students, and we could compete with schools of 3,000 and 4,000 of Zion, Benton, Stevenson, and Warren, not being able to beat them every time, but being able to beat them, then maybe that would translate at Geneva. And what I went into at Geneva was almost immediate success. It was, we had one down year, and every other year we were, very, very competitive in that area. And it just kept on getting better as things went on. And then, that kind of made me feel that when Glenbrook South opened up, and I had dozens of people saying, don't think you should take that job. Why would you leave Geneva? I felt confident in myself that I could. I've done it twice now. I feel like I can help this program out, and it's worked. So I quite honestly, I have no interest in leaving Glenbrook South. I hope to be there for the remainder of my career. But do I fear doing something again? Absolutely not.
So let's build off of that, and so you take over one of these jobs. We can use Geneva or Glenbrook South as an example. So you leave one program, you come in. It's that first summer after taking that job. So I'm going to kind of break this up into a couple parts. But the first part is, what are for you, what are the important things to kind of establish, and what are the things that can kind of wait a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the first things you got to try to do is to build a positive culture. And it doesn't happen overnight. You have to share a vision of where you think where the program is, be very brutally honest of where it is, but also establish where you want it to go. And I started very early on that. It was something very concrete. We said, we're gonna win a regional. We're gonna win conference. And when you take over a program that had, I think, one winning season in 10 years, and that's like asking to go to the moon, right? People are like, you're crazy, you're insane, this is not going to happen. And it might not have happened, right? But you have to set the bar high and tell people this is where we want to go. And the ones that want to do it they're going to get on board that train with you. And the ones that are going to hold you back are eventually going to kind of move to the side. And that's really kind of what happened. But I think that first summer, you've got to establish what is going to be your team identity. What are we going to do? You have to teach an offense. You got to teach them how to play defense. And quite honestly, what we did that first summer at Glenbrook South was not the defense we ended up using. that first season. You have to be realistic of what's going to beat the best team on our schedule. No matter what your talent level, what is going to give you a shot of beating the best team on your schedule? And that year it was Evanston. And I knew trying to play man-to-man against Evanston was not going to get it done. We had to do something that was going to force them to do not what they did best, but what they did second or third best, which was still really good. and that first season, they crushed us at their place. I kind of came in, I'm like, guys, we're going to get after these guys. We're going to show them that Glenbrook South is not the Glenbrook South they played last year. And they crushed us at their place. And then they came back a month later, and we should have won the game at home. And we lost in overtime. And, I'm upset, but our kids are like celebrating. It's like, well, okay, great that, except for the guy that missed the free throw that would have had a chance for us to win the game. But everyone was like, they finally saw, okay, what coach is asking of us can be achieved. And I felt like now we got them.
So let's go into kind of the second part of that question. And you kind of started to allude to it, which is picking the offense that best fits, picking the defense that best fits, and then kind of establishing that brand that you want to bring that first year. How do you kind of go about those things?
Yeah. I've played around with lots of different offenses, and I'd like to believe that what I do is a hybrid of a lot of things that I like. And I feel like it's allowed me to, especially later in my career, to pick and choose sets that I think really work with the talent that I've got. I know there's certain guys that probably scout me and my teams and have said, well, this is a play they run and that's a play they run. But I think that the portfolio is so large that if you're going to try to figure out what we're doing, good luck. I've feel like, when I started out as a head coach, we ran the Auburn Shuffle. I am not kidding. And we were probably the only school in the state of Illinois that ran the Auburn Shuffle. And it was the offense that was kind of handed off to me at Grant. It was, this is what you run. And my first assistant at Grant, Fritz Kozlowski, he was a 40-year veteran, young head coach with a much older veteran, retired teacher, great coach, who would have been a great head coach himself. I kind of learned after my first season, I needed to turn something over to my assistant, and Fritz was brilliant on offense. And he made that Auburn Shuffle run so awesome that we went from 8 wins our first season to 20 wins our second season. It was like an amazing turnaround. And so I ran that for a few years. And then as time went on and Fritz was no longer my assistant and I had other assistants that kind of came up, I kind of branched out in learning, right? I try to figure out, okay, well, what's going to be the best offense for our program? Because I can't go back to my old philosophy of running straight motion. Like we did at Deerfield when I was an assistant under Steve Pappas, and can't run straight the kind of motion, the college motion that we ran at Northwestern when I was working for Ricky Birdsong. What's going to work best for our kids? And it happened that I liked to, before the season, go to in the summer I like to go to college camps. That's where I kind of got my start in coaching. And I ended up meeting a guy named Greg Gard, who was an assistant for Bo Ryan. And I still remember to this day sitting at the breakfast table at a summer camp with him. And we were just talking basketball. And he asked me, well, what do you run? And he goes, well, that sounds very similar to kind of what we do here. Would you like to learn more about it? And I was like, sure. So he indoctrinated me on the swing offense, which is very similar to flex, but different in many different ways. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, this is for us. This is This is perfect. This is what we need. And ever since, at some level, that's kind of our base level of our offense is the swing. And then ultimately, after you run it for, 3 or 4 seasons, and that's all you do, you run that as a continuity offense. Well, people gimmick you. They get, they're going to try to take you out of it. They're going to make you do other things. And that's where I had to learn to be a little bit more clever. Or hide it or disguise it. And so, I took some Princeton concepts and tried to incorporate them. So teams couldn't, constantly gimmick switches with switches. And I would come up with different type of entries that I saw other teams do. And then ultimately, we got to a certain point at Geneva where, we had a really good basketball player, Nate Navigato, and we had to get him to touch the ball every time when we had an offensive possession, and teams would try to gimmick us. So we would run pro sets and college sets that would ultimately have 3, 4, 5 different options, all of them him touching the ball at some point in those options, but giving other kids chances to get easy scores out of it if teams try to take that away from us. And so it's kind of snowballed into we run a set, and if the set doesn't work, at some point it's going to flow into swing. And what's amazing is that, as seasons have gone on, teams might take us out of a set, and then we end up scoring out of swing off of a backside cut. And teams are like, well, how did that happen? It's because our kids have been indoctrinated into how we run our offense. And it's very layered, and it's complex if you're walking into it day one, but if the kids have been indoctrinated at a base level running swing and then running different sets, it's worked.
All right, so I'm gonna branch off here. I got an interesting follow up on that. So obviously your tier, you just talked about tiering it at different levels, right? Your base level and things like that. How do you go about kind of putting that together, right, for each level, even down to maybe your youth levels, right? Because obviously swing's a little bit different than what most people run. A lot of people run motion,
Right.
some kind of pick and roll, whatever. So when you're looking at kind of breaking it down all the way down to your younger levels, how do you go about taking those pieces and figuring out, at a sophomore level, we should be kind of here, right? We should have these things, and then, that way.
Yeah. That's a great question. It's been, when we first put in the swing, I wanted it at every level, and I even wanted our feeder level to run it, and I was looking for our junior highs to run it. And what I came to realize is that, I only had a certain amount of say. I had say over my program. Very difficult to have say over a feeder program, and even more difficult when you're dealing with junior high coaches. So the ones that were receptive to it did it. The ones that weren't wouldn't. And so the only thing I could really worry about is, could we teach it in the summer at our summer camps? Could we to the youth? And then our freshmen just had to get those kids to understand all the intricacies of run and swing. And so ultimately what I did is I tried to develop some very simple rules of running offense, right? So, kids will say, or I'd say the people that don't like swing, right, would say, well, you're not giving kids enough freedom, right? You're not giving them any freedom. And so what we would do is we'd say, well, we're going to give you freedom. Ultimately, we want you to try to score layups, and we want you to try to score wide open threes. Those are going to be the goals. So if anyone looks at our shot charts through the levels, they're going to say, well, wow, everything's concentrated in the lane and everything's concentrated on the three-point line. And for me, that's kind of like, if I was to just look at a shot chart of any of our levels, if I see it and it looks like that, I'm like, okay, something is going right. Maybe not all aspects of it, but the simple rules of, we want you to shoot wide open threes, and we want you to shoot on passes going into the post. And the fact that we would post anybody, post your point guard, post your best wing. That's not something that's being taught much these days, right? And so teams really struggle when they're defending team with the things they don't see very often, right? And so that's the base level for us. We want that established with our freshmen. We want them to know all the different entries to getting into swing. We want them to understand the ball side triangle. We want them to understand the high spacing where there are 4 guys free throw line or above, which makes it very difficult to pressure teams that are running it. We want them to understand the importance of screening. We want them to understand the importance of making good passes. So we're all emphasizing good basketball, right? And then when you incorporate things like boomerang passes and ball screen actions out of it, it's a lot easier to teach that because you've already established good spacing and good principles in regards to screening and cutting without the ball. And the other simple rule we add there is, anytime kids don't need to look for approval or from the bench of, did I do this right? One man to beat. Anytime we got just one guy between me and the basket, I can drive. And if you can establish that with the kids, they understand, okay, well, now I know when I should drive to the basket. When it becomes 1-on-2, you got to stop it, reverse dribble. You got to find the opening or hammer play it or whatever it is to get that ball back out to the guy that's not being guarded. And if you can establish and get the kids really to buy in that what we're trying to do is not taking tough contested shots and trying to find easier shots that are going to make our shooting percentages go up and give us a greater chance to win, then you're going to be pretty good.
All right, so we're gonna kind of go back to part of the initial question, but say you decide, hey, I'm gonna switch job, take this over this job my first year, and you're looking in your first year, so it's kind of, you got to figure out your players, right? You got to figure out your program. When you're in those situations, right, especially coming from like say Geneva, and then you went to GBS, what are you looking to learn in that kind of first year? Maybe basketball wise, but also off the court wise and school wise and program wise and culture wise.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you don't know what the culture is before you go in there. When I went into Geneva had their football program was rolling. I mean, it was great. And we were sharing athletes and I've really, I would say that at GBS, we don't share as many athletes between football and basketball as I had at other programs I've been at. And I kind of get it because we're getting kids that are now being hyper focused on a sport, which I think is a bad idea. And in rare cases, I understand it, but for most kids, be a multiple sport athlete is I think beneficial to you. But at Geneva, it was kind of a nightmare situation. Football program went to the state championship game, and there were 8 kids that we were expecting were going to make the basketball team. And so I had to completely postpone tryouts for those kids until after our Thanksgiving tournament. And what made it worse is I went into that Thanksgiving tournament with 5 kids, and we had to bring up 2 sophomores to just make sure that we had some bench depth. And the surprising part, and it might be one of the most amazing things I've ever been a part of, we won the whole thing. We won the tournament, and we beat some really, really good teams to win that tournament. That was down at Oswego. That was the Hoops for Healing tournament. And so what a great way to start your career at a new school is to win that Thanksgiving tournament. But that previous summer, I had to identify what were our strengths and what were our weaknesses. I had to identify what's going to be the offense going to work best for us, what's not going to work for us. What type of defense can we run with the group that we've got that's going to make us competitive, right? And when you're going into a program and you're looking at a program that it wasn't like winning championships before, it wasn't like I was walking into a school that just won 20 games, won conference, won a regional, and you're trying to say, this is where we want to get to. you have to really identify early who are the guys that you can have as scorers, who are the guys that can get the ball from point A to point B to get you in your offense, who are guys that you can identify that are going to really attack defensively and buy in to playing great team defense. And what I found is a group of kids that were just hungry for success. And some of those kids were hungry for success because they were part of a successful football program. But the other part of it is the kids that weren't, they wanted to prove that they were great competitors too. And even though if they weren't competing in football, they wanted to show that we could do in basketball what the football team was doing. And so it made things a lot easier for me to get that early success. 21 wins that first year at Geneva. I still think back on that. We won the Thanksgiving tournament. We won DeKalb's holiday tournament that year, which was really competitive. We beat a great Chicago vocational school, beat a really good Rockford Jefferson school. I think back on it, I'm like, that was like, I wish I could bottle that magic every year because it came together so quickly in some ways. It had a lot to do with the situation at GBS. It was harder. It was, that first season was a grind. It was, the kids wanted to believe what I was asking was going to happen, but I watched film, and I do this occasionally to remind myself. I like to watch film of years where maybe we weren't doing so well, right? And that first Thanksgiving tournament with GBS, we couldn't run basic swing. It was a struggle. And to watch the frustration that the kids were having when they weren't competing against themselves to go up against really good teams that could pressure them and take them out of what they're doing. It reminds me of, okay, not always are things going to go well, and how are you going to fix that?
So that's kind of a perfect transition to my next question then. Building out that long-term plan, where you're at. Obviously, a lot of times it takes the first year to really know, okay, I have this idea coming in, but you go into it, okay, we can do this, or maybe we got to tweak it a little bit. So how do you, maybe it's a 5-year plan. I don't know. I kind of feel like nowadays maybe it's coming down to a 3-year plan at some schools, right? At some programs, because the landscape changes a little bit. But how do you go and build that long-term plan after you kind of initially gather your information on, okay, this is the kind of kids we have, this is the players we have, maybe some of the players coming. How do you build that plan?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that I've got like one of those 5-year plans. I think I'm looking at it's almost like a 1-year plan, right? I am trying to look long down the road, have that longer vision. But I try not to look too far ahead because I feel like there's nothing that's promised you, right? The best laid plans just never seem to work themselves out, right? And so I really try to look at what's gonna really make us be as competitive as we possibly can this next year. So this coming year's team is not going to be last year's team. There might be a lot of things we do that's similar. It's not going to be a wholesale change, but we're going to try to put our guys to play to their strengths and not to their weaknesses. So, at this point, we're going to train and polish the guys that the things that they do well, not the things that they don't do well. So that's kind of how I've operated, and I've always felt like every year you're going to get, 1 or 2 surprises from kids that just kind of seem to come out of nowhere, and then you're going to get kind of what you hope and you expect from the core group that you're hoping are going to what they can achieve.
So we kind of want to now go into a little bit of off-season evaluation, and so during the spring and the fall, it's obviously a little bit different than the summer in that we can kind of tweak things and try things with our kids. But during the spring and the fall, when you're evaluating your team for the next year, what are some things that you use to maybe evaluate yourselves? And then how do you match your team to that evaluation for the next year? And then in that same evaluation period, how do you use your assistant coaches?
That's fantastic question. I think one of the best things that I learned, when I was a young head coach, I was very sensitive to criticism, right? I wanted to hear the praise, but I wasn't willing to take the criticism. And I learned that in postseason evals that it was not fair of me as a head coach to evaluate my players and expect from them to make changes in their game from their sophomore to junior or junior to senior year if I wasn't willing to take the same criticism of what I needed to do better. So, one of the things that and year in, year out, I can't say that I'm always great at this, but I'm always receptive to this, is that, I want my players to give me feedback. What did I do well? What did the staff do well? What did we not do well? And what could we do better? And I feel like if you have that openness with your players, it often pays you back, right? You've gained some level of trust in that relationship that you're building with your team, with your athletes, because I'm a fallible human being, right? And I joke with the kids. I might be godlike, but I'm not God, right? But all kidding aside, if they understand that, I'm not perfect. I'm just giving you the best opportunity I can to be your coach. But I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to be a better person. I think more often than not, the really good kids get it, appreciate it, and they want to try to emulate that, right? They're like, oh, wait, coach isn't saying he's always right. He wants to be better too. I need to do the same thing. But more importantly, it builds that relationship that is just so consequential to the success of a program and creating a positive culture in the program.
All right, so we're gonna go a little halftime break here, maybe a little bit more basketball segment called halftime adjustments.
Yeah,
just in general here. Halftime buzzer buzzes. You're getting, your players run off, go to the locker room, wherever. First thing, like, what are you talking with your coaches about? Is there certain stats you're looking at? Is there a certain, part of your system you're looking at, trying to get? And then when you go in, how are you disseminating that information to your players, whether it's your assistants, maybe different groups as a whole? Just kind of the halftime process that you guys go through to make those adjustments needed to have a successful second half.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to do is to counsel with whether we're up or down, counsel with my assistants and kind of get their feedback. I would like us to be more analytic based on it. We're trying to look at certain tendencies that we're seeing. What have we done that's been going well? What are things that we could be doing better? I kind of go to my gut more often than not when I'm talking to the team. When we get in there, it's, where do I feel like the momentum is going? If we had a lead and I felt like a team is pushing us at the end, okay, we got to win the third quarter, right? And kind of the kids probably think it's a broken record because I say it almost all the time. Win the first 4 minutes of the third quarter, right? We're going to win the first 4 minutes. If we can do that, we're going to be good shape. Or if I feel like, a certain player hasn't touched the ball enough, it's okay. We've got to run these sets to try to get more touches. Last year, if Martinelli wasn't touching the ball enough, he's got to get touches. And it wasn't my way of saying he's got to shoot. It was more of saying, our best players have to get touches on the ball. Or, last year, if Cooper Nord had 0 points at half, part of us are like, oh boy, what's going to happen in the second half? Is he going to just start shooting everything that's a bad shot? It's reminding them, okay, we want to make sure that we're taking uncontested shots. We want to make sure that we are creating situations where they've got to guard two, they got to put two to guard the ball to get a guy open. It's setting those kinds of reminders of understanding where you are at that halftime and what's going to keep you on that path of success when you get into that third quarter. But I've really been in that mindset that no matter how the first half went, you've got to really, get the perspective locked in of how you come out your approach into that third quarter. And, I would argue, and it's a great criticism of me. I've had people say, man, you guys look terrible coming out in that first quarter. And, why can't you do in the first quarter what you do in the third quarter? Right. And I don't know, maybe that's something I got to do better. Right.
So I want to build on that a little bit. So you said, looking at what you're doing well in maybe not so well in the first half. Do you have your assistants maybe looking at a certain aspect, or are you guys more overall picture? You know what I mean? Like it's hard as a head coach, right? You're calling out a set, you're looking at this, you can't see everything, right? You think you can, but it's not possible. So how do you use your assistants to kind of help you? Hey, maybe we're doing this really well, but you might not see that.
So I kind of give my my assistant Zach Walker right now is my lead assistant, and I've kind of put him in charge of defense. So his role is to kind of pay attention to the defensive aspects that he's seeing and to kind of point out, how are they attacking us? What can we do to stop them? Make any adjustments that we need to do on a certain player. Like if they've had a player that went off and scored 10, 15 points in the first half, okay, maybe we need to change how we're defending that. If it's specials, we didn't score off of our specials. Okay, let's focus in on that. We need to make sure that we're being, aggressive at the rim at trying to get higher percentage shots. So there might be little tweaks like that. I always make sure before I head into the locker room to look at our foul situations, look at their foul situations. I'm looking at who's got the hot hand for them and, who's been doing well for us. But really when it comes down to it, it's just reminders of, how do we win? What types of shots are we taking? Are we sticking to the script? And when we're not, okay, let's go back to our fundamentals. Let's go back to our base and focus in that way.
So I want to go into bigger picture coaching. You've had tremendous success everywhere you've been, 100+ wins at all your stops. But as you look at kind of the coaching landscape, and John and I have talked about this over the spring and the summer, especially this year, almost I don't know if the record number, but an alarming number of coaches leaving the profession and deciding to do something else, or maybe being asked to do something else, right? So how do we go about having good quality coaches, but being coaching profession for the long run, right? And maybe why do you feel some of these coaches are leaving?
Yeah, I'm first of all, I'm of the mindset that the pressure of winning is real. It is, and if you haven't had success for a prolonged period of time, you must have a very special community and relationship with your administration to survive that, because at a certain point, someone's going to ask you to step down. And even when you win, right? Even when you win, there's still that pressure to continue to win. And so I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I've really tried to not focus as much on winning. I mean, we're trying to win every game, right? But I'm trying to focus on bigger pictures, right? I'm trying to focus on maintaining a positive culture with our team. And I maintain on trying to teach the game of basketball and my philosophy and with my assistants as best I can. And figuring out that winning will be a part of that process if we're doing things the right way. We're not going to win every game. But if we kind of can focus on certain aspects of our season and that the winning will take care of itself. But I think it's alarming, right? I think COVID coaching during COVID killed the joy of being a coach, right? Because we had all these mandates of what we had to do with the mask wearing and the restrictions on what we could do and what we couldn't do with athletes. And I think that frustration has built. I think the other aspect of it is, I think, I'm not trying to pick on younger coaches because I think there are ones that are grinders out there, but there are not a lot of guys that I know that are learn-it-alls anymore. And what I mean by that is people that are willing to just go to as many sources as they possibly can to try to find out different ways of being successful, of learning, right? And there's many things that I've learned through the years that I probably will never implement into the game of basketball for myself, but I know it, right? And I think with social media, the ability to find stuff on YouTube, those are great resources. And I learned from those places too. But there's something different than when you go to a basketball clinic, when you when you work a college basketball camp and you meet coaches from other places, when you take your team to a team camp and you compete against teams from other states, when you go to coaches clinics. I mean, sadly, the old Nike clinic, the old USA basketball clinics, those don't exist anymore. And I felt like, yes, some of those clinicians were great and informative. And there are other times where it was a waste of an hour and a half. But I really feel like we don't have a generation of coaches that are continuing to do that. And my fear is that I think that some people think that being able to recruit a kid to your school that's really talented is good coaching, right? And I think that's what we're seeing right now is you got these kids that are bouncing around between schools, and maybe it's through their AAU connections, maybe it's because of some skills trainer connection. You got these kids bouncing around, and what's the focus here? Is it about teaching kids how to be resilient when things aren't going their way? Is it about teaching them how to play within a team concept? I don't think, my fear is I think that there's too many people that might think that good coaching is, well, I just brought in the best athlete that's in the state to my team. And that's not really what it is.
So let's kind of build on that a little bit, and let's, you and I were talking about, over the next 10 years a little bit when we were texting off the air, but, what do you think the game will look like 5 years from now, whether it's new rule changes or shot clock implementation or more kids transferring or more kids, coaches coming and going? I mean, we had a coaching situation in the state where a coach was somewhere and was there for a few months and then left. Like Todd said, there was 30 plus coaching openings this offseason between girls and boys. So where do you think that the game's going to go in the next 5 years?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I'm not saying that you have to hire an in-school teacher to be your head coach to run a good program. I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. But, when that used to be what it was, right? Like I knew that when I made that transfer from going to college to high school, it was going to require me to be a teacher. I was going to have to get an education degree or need to be certified to teach. And I was going to have to work my way up. I was naive enough as a really, really young coach coming out of college to the teaching profession. I thought it's kind of a funny story when I think about it. I was so naive. The Stevenson job opened up. Pat Ambrose gets it, which well-deserved. He's a phenomenal coach. What a great leader he is for them. But I had it in my head when that job opened up. I was like, oh, I'm going to get that job. That'll be a piece of cake. Here I got offers to be an assistant at Central Michigan and Akron that were in the works. And I thought, well, I can have those jobs if I want them. But, it'll be a piece of cake to get a head high school job. And I couldn't even get an interview. So, it used to be that you had to be a teacher especially at the public schools. You had to be a teacher to just be entertained. You had to be able to teach in the classroom to be a coach. I think that's becoming less and less so. And part of it is of the teaching profession. You got some people that don't want to coach, that are teachers, and they've got to fill these jobs to get people to teach in the classroom. And so now you got school districts that are looking outside that area to, whether it's they're looking for assistants. And, for myself, we've got 2 assistant coaches in our program that are not teachers in our building. I think that didn't happen 20 years ago. Right. So I think that you can be outside the school district or whatever school it is that you're coaching and be successful. But I think by and large, when your only resume is only that you've worked for an AAU program or that you've done skills training, I'm not saying that those people can't be really good head coaches, but the job of being a head coach is very different than teaching some aspect of the game. It involves so much more than that. You're the PR guy. You're developing the feeder program. You're setting schedules. There's so many components of being a head coach that don't involve you talking to a kid one-on-one on how they can improve their game, right? And it's very different idea of how do you improve one kid's skill sets to how do you get them to play with other kids and play competitively to win as an organization, right? How do you develop a philosophy so that all your levels are going to be successful or build kids to come up to your level later? There's so many aspects of the game that even at coaching clinics, they're not taught, that should be taught. How can you successfully run a basketball program? And it's something that I had to kind of learn on my own, right? There was no college course for me to take. It took a lot of networking, a lot of allowing people to be mentors to me to learn how to best do this, right? But my fear is that the longevity, you get coaches. I think part of our problem is that there's a lot of coaches, especially younger coaches, that get into it, find out that the job is very different than what they thought they signed up for, and they get out. And I think, or they get families, and life gets too busy, and they feel like they have to make a choice of, and they choose their family, which is probably the right choice to make. But I think the other component of this, we've had a lot of older coaches that have just struggled for the last few years because of COVID, and they've just decided, this is a really good time for me to stop.
So, Coach, you brought up a great point. This was a phenomenal answer that I hope our listeners do listen to. So I kind of want to build off that a little bit about, how do we teach the young coaches? Because every time I talk to a coach that's just taking over, and they'll say, like, there's so many things that went into this that I had no idea. You and I off the air had joked about both of our first years when, we looked around and we were like, wow, there is a whole lot more of ordering uniforms and ordering practice jerseys and making the schedule and making sure there's enough players to play in the summer league game and doing a parent meeting and all these things. How do we, all jokes aside, not a college course, but how do we develop something to teach young coaches? These are the things that go into being a head coach that are way outside of Friday night's game.
Yeah. Well, it's evolved, but I developed kind of like a flow chart of responsibilities. And, early on as a head coach, I felt like I had to do everything. Like I had to literally do everything and not allow my assistants to be good assistants. And it's evolved and I've gotten better. I do feel like to a certain level, I'm kind of a control freak. I want things to be the way they are. I want, the vision that I have to end up where I think it should be. But I've really relaxed and allowed my assistants. It's more of understanding that, when I was an assistant, I wanted to be able to have a say. Like when I was at Northwestern, my job was to take notes about certain aspects of the game and keep your mouth shut. And when there was something to share, I would hand a handwritten note to one of the assistants. And sometimes he would crumple it up, and other times he'd look at it, and then he would be the person to say it to the head coach. And so, talk about, taking away your hubris right there is that you understand that you're really this little. And so, I feel like I've allowed guys that I see as having the ability to take something off my plate, and trusting them implicitly that they're going to, through conversations we've had, do what I would want them to do, and to give them the freedom to say, this is yours, you're in charge of it. That when we have to have a tough conversation of, hey, why is this not the way it is? They can at least say, well, you trusted me to be able to do this, and their level of effort goes up, right? And but it's really been, I want them to be learn-it-alls like me. That's the other part of it, right? And not all of my assistants have done that. In some very rare occasions, I've had to say he's not performing what I thought we need to do, and I've had to have the tough conversation with a couple of assistants, say, I don't think you can coach with us this next year, right? But some years I do better at this, others I don't. I try to put out a drill book that is more or less anything that I felt like I would want to see my assistants run in a practice. And then we talk about teaching how we want to run offense and teaching how we want to run our defense. And it's as simple as that. It's setting the expectations. And then if I have coaches that don't understand what we're doing, it's trying to get them to teach them, right? Last year I had to teach two new assistant coaches how we run swing, and how do we layer that to run sets that flow into swing, and just show them it, right? But the other aspect of it, I ask of my assistants, I want them to be learn-it-alls too.
So I want to go into kind of like your team makeups, right? When you kind of know you have a team and they're kind of getting it. You obviously made some deep runs downstate, and you get to that January, February time. What are some signs to you? Because everybody wants to play at their highest level going into the playoffs, right? That's kind of the ultimate goal. Sometimes in the year you're figuring things out, you got new players. So what are the signs for you that your team's playing at a high level and kind of peaking at the right time? And then at those points, how much of that is kind of driven by your players, right? You kind of know, okay, we got it here, and now the kids are really kind of running their own thing and got that good connection to make a deep run.
Well, first of all, I think you taper your season, right? You're hoping, usually when we hit middle of January, you have a good sense of where you're at in regards to the sectional layout. You're looking at what's still ahead and what's going to help best prepare you to get into that state tournament and do well. And, some of it, I've done this a long enough time that some of it's luck and some of it's, bad luck. But I feel like if you can taper it, the season, where maybe you're not going harder, you're going smarter. And this is something else you learn as a more veteran head coach. I felt that my practices early in my career had to be as hard, if not harder, at the end of the season as they were at the beginning of the season. And that was so counterintuitive. It was actually coaching another sport that I worked with a guy who would make I coached cross country. I know that's hard to believe, but I coached cross country, and this coach was like, he's like running these practices at the end of the season where kids are hardly doing anything. They were doing spin and bikes, and he would do some short intervals for a half hour, 45 minutes, and he'd cut them loose. And I'd be like, Coach, what are you doing? You got to get ready for the conference meeting for regionals, these guys aren't going to be ready. He's like, if I burn them out now, he's like, they're going to get to those meets and they might have the high adrenaline, but they're not going to do as well. You got to taper things off. And that's really when it clicked with me that what I was doing with my basketball teams at Grant was I was burning those kids out when we got to those regional meets or regional, and as badly as they might want it, their bodies just couldn't take it. Right. And so it's a 4-month season. It's a long season. So I learned that you have to taper things off and focus on, really on what's the toughest team on your schedule. How can you best prepare to be as competitive as you can in that game? And then treat that as a vision for a regional final. Like I'll say at the end of the game, guys, this is a regional final game. Are you ready to win a regional? If you are, you have to win this game. This is what we have to do. And if we did come on the losing end, okay, this is where we came short. This is what we got to focus on to get ready to be able to win a regional. So make everything a learning experience for the kids and put them in the best places so that they can visualize their own success.
All right, Coach, we want to transition to our last 2 segments here. First one's 30-second timeout. Your chance to talk about anything you want to talk about. It doesn't have to be basketball, something you think is important. Whatever it may be, you can promote your program a little bit. You want to have a discussion with us, whatever it may be. It's your very loose 30-second timeout. We're not gonna yell at you. Second horn, first horn, and get out of my huddle here. I got more things to talk about. It's all you for next 30 seconds or however long you want, really.
Sure. I would say I'm going to bring up high school gyms. I think, one of the things that makes me feel so blessed to be the head coach at Glenbrook South is every day I get to have practice in the Titan Dome. It is such a cool place. It's a place that I've known since I was in high school. I went to Glenbrook North, ironically, which is strange that a Glenbrook North grad is coaching at Glenbrook South. I don't know if many people know that, but anyhow, so I've been fascinated with high school gyms, and I couldn't tell you when it started, but I've always felt like there are places around the state that are just so unique, and make the game more interesting. And on Friday nights when it's a packed gym, what kind of environments they create for communities. So, like Waukegan, to me as a young coach, young assistant at Deerfield, and just not understanding and fully appreciating the environment. I thought every game was like that, right? And it's not. So I've been fascinated. So I've kind of always tried to get games at different places. Like this year, we're going to Jacksonville. And just what I like about it is that I know it's part of it's my own selfish reasons of interest, but the other part of it is I think it's good for our kids to get out of our area and to check out just how special the game of high school basketball is in other parts of our state, and to look at the unique aspects of these gyms. They're not just these, newer cookie cutter gyms with bleachers, right? They're functional, but maybe a little bit less interesting. So, East Aurora, I think is an awesome gym. Love East Aurora. And I've had several of my teams go down to Quincy, and boy, if you haven't experienced a Quincy varsity basketball game, you're missing something. And I think those types of experiences really have enriched. I have kids that still talk to me about what was it like to have the Blue Devil mascot rush out with a flaming pitchfork, shaking it in your face as they're running right past you. They still think that's the coolest thing ever. And we lost the game, right? But they go back and they think of that experience as one of their better memories. I've played in Moline. So I've really tried to think of different places around the state, and whether I go to visit by myself or whether I've been able to take my teams there, I've always tried to reach out. And there's still several places I would like to go. Last year, we were told we couldn't because of COVID. We had scheduled a game with a team from Indiana to go play at the Hoosier Gym, which is still, I'm hoping at some point we can make that happen. maybe with a future team.
So as we get into our last segment, we call this quick hitters. This is Todd and my chance to just have some fun with the guests and just to ask some of the times off the wall questions. So the first one we want to get into is, obviously you're an English teacher, so your favorite novel or book to teach.
Sadly, I don't teach anymore, but the Odyssey is one that I taught for almost 20 years, and I loved it. I think it's so emblematic of kids, right? They're in high school, whether they realize it or not, they're going on a journey, just like Odysseus. Some bad things are going to happen in their lives, some good things are going to happen in their lives, and ultimately they can come to the end where they can learn that they are part of all whom they have met, right? And I really try to focus in on that, right? That life is made up of that. What makes life so worth living and so enriching is the ability to connect with others. And that's what I think that novel teaches. It's so, for me, fun to teach, right? It has some adventures, so it draws in kids to it. But when you look at those deep lessons that Odysseus learns throughout his travels, and then you kind of connect it, guys, you're going off into the big wide world when you leave high school. You are Odysseus, and, be open to enriching your lives. Even when bad things happen, bad things can lead to new opportunities. I think it's so valuable to teach that. But the other one that I currently teach is To Kill a Mockingbird. And that's a book that I tell the kids, I read it 3 times before really appreciating it. I read it when I was far too young to really understand what it was about. At a very surface level, I understood what it was about. I think I read it in 6th grade. Could not appreciate it at that point. I did read it again in high school, and in high school, just I didn't connect with it. And I understand some kids don't maybe connect with it, but I did read it in college. And again, and the 3rd time it really kind of hit me. I was like, this is so impactful. And the way I look at it right now, we are living in an environment that is very divided right now. It is so much what is happening in that novel is still happening today. So can we learn from this? Yes, absolutely we can. I feel like more people need to be open to, trying to, we need more Atticuses in the world, right? We need more Atticus Finches in the world. We need people to be able to stand up on the moral high ground and to say, this isn't right. We need to treat people better. We need to treat people as human beings and treat others as we wish to be treated. And that connection of which I truly have in all aspects of my life, trying to be a good teammate to everyone in my life, treat others better than you wish to be treated, is maybe what we need to have more of in our society today.
All right, Jon, now we get into the real deep diving questions.
That's right.
Tremendous answer, Coach, but we're getting to the real deep diving questions with these next 2. Traditional or boneless wings?
If it was my son, it's going to be boneless. For me, it's traditional. I'm a big buffalo wing fan, probably more than I should be. I'm going traditional.
All
right. So now even tougher now. Ketchup on a hot dog, yes or no?
You know what? Someone would say it's probably the small Minnesotan in me. Yes, ketchup on a hot dog. Okay. I'll go with the mustard. I'm fine with mustard on my hot dog. But I do get a little irritated when they won't put ketchup on it as well. Ketchup, mustard, pickle, tomato, sport peppers. I'm good.
There we go. Your favorite athlete growing up as a kid?
Jeez, this is so hard. Someone's going to expect me to put down a basketball player. I don't know if I can narrow down favorite. On the baseball side, Ryan Sandberg was big for me. I was definitely a Cubs fan from watching WGN in the summers as a youth. I was a big baseball card collector. Steve Garvey would have been one of my heroes too, because I thought he was pretty awesome. But on the basketball side, I got to see and not really even truly appreciate Pete Maravich late in his career, and um, Larry Bird, obviously, Michael Jordan, obviously would be big on my list. But I'm going to go out and say favorite athlete, Adrian Dantley.
Okay. All right. This is another tough one. Red or green grapes?
Red. Absolutely red. Yep. Especially if they're straight out of the fridge.
There we go. Favorite college basketball offense to watch? Maybe something you're looking at right now, something you've seen recently, something in the past. Obviously, you talked about swimming and some of your Princeton stuff, but something you're kind of interested in right now.
That's such a good question. Jeez.
Could even be just a simple concept that you've
True.
seen.
Yeah. Right now we're looking at so much.
I know.
I find what Matt Painter has been doing at Purdue is absolute. This guy is just running clinics. He is such a brilliant offensive mind. He shows you what you need to do with your bigs. He shows you what you need to do with your guards. He runs such complex little nuances to his offenses that intrigue me so immensely. He's definitely one of the coaches the last 3 years I've been studying most, just because, and they're so fun to watch, right? I'm not a big Purdue, I'm a Big Ten snob, and I'll support all the Big Ten schools, but Purdue's not one of the teams that I would say is my team, but I'm fascinated with what he does year in and year out. So right now, that's kind of my team to kind of pay attention to.
If only you could find bigs consistently like that.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got a 7'6" guy. He's got a 7-foot guy.
Well, my Geneva team, we had my team that went down state. We did have 9 guys that were 6'4" to 6'10" on that team. That was very unique.
All right, last one. Maybe another high school program that's out there, in Illinois, could be in another state, to be quite honest, but maybe another high school program out there that you've long been a fan of or learned or stolen something from the outside.
Yeah. We do such a good job scouting, so I get a lot of film on a lot of teams. It's so easy these days with Huddle. I like to stay in touch with my former assistants, and see what they're doing. But lately, I would say, I'm always fascinated with what Coach Heidkamp is doing at Bennett. I feel like he always seems to be able to maximize. I feel like his style of play is very similar to teams that I've had. And so I kind of like to take a look at what they're doing. And I usually see them in the summer. And at some point I'm watching games that they'll play later. And ironically, I think we've only played each other once, which was a long time ago. But I have a deep, deep respect for the job that he does. And I think he's just an absolutely brilliant coach. The other guys that I would look at is, I think Wheaton Warville South is kind of an interesting school to watch, right? I think that Stevenson, Pat Ambrose, have always had a deep respect for what he does. I think he's a brilliant coach. And I try to pay attention to I might come across something as the season goes along that kind of catches my interest, and we'll try to study what they're doing and how they're doing it. But I would say those are probably the 3 guys that I'm looking at most.
Well, Coach, we can't thank you enough. This was an awesome episode. A lot of great stuff, not only basketball wise, but I'm gonna encourage our coaches to listen to the first quick hitter question, because that was just a great answer about life and obviously learning things from other sources, right? A lot of times as basketball coaches, you just get focused on basketball. Just awesome stuff today, and we can't thank you enough for joining us.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be on here. I think this is one of those great podcasts. I've been a big podcast fan, and certainly become more so over the COVID situation that we all lived through. And boy, what a great source for coaches. And going back to younger coaches and young people who want to be a head coach, what a great place to go find a plethora of knowledge that will be shared from all these different head coaches. What you guys are doing is fantastic.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast in concert with the Illinois Basketball Coaches Association. Please remember to give us a 5-star rating wherever you may listen. For more show content and upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout and subscribe to our podcast for upcoming episodes. Thank you for listening.